Past Bravo, a podcast for the professional aviation community. We're a podcast that brings you the latest news, interviews, and even the occasional debate. Whether you're a flight attendant, pilot, mechanic, engineer, or anything in between, we've got something for you.
Ray, that was a great introduction. I'm so glad to be hosting this podcast with you. I was thinking, just to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ray Gardner. I didn't originally go to school for undergrad to do aviation. I went purely for ROTC and for Air Force, and through that I was hoping to be a pilot, but that wasn't the route for me. So I ended up getting my Master's of Science in Aviation Safety at the University of North Dakota because I wanted to get back into aviation. I wanted to make that my focus. That's where I wanted to go. And so I focused on aviation safety and was able to get my private pilot's license for helicopter and spent a year in the cold up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. How about you, Cory?
Very nice. Before we get to me, I just want to ask, what got you interested in the helicopter?
I've always loved helicopters. I took my first ride when I was 12, 13 years old in the Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee. And my dad asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, you bet. And we took a quick 15-minute ride in the Smokies. It was gorgeous, and the bug bit me then. So,
gotcha. It's always those short little 15-minute flights that gets people into it.
I had flown, we had taken a trip out to Oklahoma City when I was young, flying from Nashville to Oklahoma City. And while that was fun, and I can give that story at another time, there's nothing like flying in a helicopter to me. So that's where it really got me that I wanted to fly.
Gotcha. So a little bit about myself, similar stuff to you. Got that bug probably when I was 11, 12 years old. Previously, I lived on a military base out there in London. There's a little base called Feltwell and Lakenheath and Mildenhall, and watching those airplanes scream across the sky, it was something that got me at a young age. And growing up, I eventually ended up in Civil Air Patrol and got to go on a bunch of O flights. And when you get into that little airplane and you're flying around Long Island and on the East Coast, there's something about it that gets in your blood.
Yeah.
So I went to a small school in New York City called Vaughan College, got my undergrad in airport management, and I thought I wanted to work at the airport and be on the ground there. Mm-hmm. Somehow I ended up at JetBlue as an intern, and that opened my eyes to the incredible airline industry. And that's where I'm at now. I'm currently working on my MBA just to try
at the rival school, Embry-Riddle.
And Embry-Riddle, kind of a little bit different from North Dakota. At least it's warm where that school is.
Yeah.
We can actually fly. Whereas during the winter, you can't really fly, right?
Yeah, winters are rough in Grand Forks, depending whether it's snowing or the wind. You're dealing with some severe weather conditions. So yeah,
absolutely. We both came to work together, and it's a small industry, and got to know each other. And this podcast, it's really going to help the industry out.
Yeah. Give us an opportunity to work on something that we really enjoy, really love, which is aviation, getting back to our roots. That's the reason we wanted to tell you a little bit of our backgrounds, and we'll share more the further we go with this podcast, because I know Cory's got some great stories. I've got a few that I'd like to share. But yeah, that's just a little bit of a background to get you started and why we're in this and what we're doing. So
absolutely. Thanks, Ray. One of the things I heard recently, actually on the news, was a problem with the C-Series and with Boeing. And Boeing is pushing for tariffs and everything. And I know you've been following the subject, so I was wondering if you wanted to give a little bit of background on what the C-Series is, and hopefully our listeners can get a quick look into it.
Sure. C-Series is an airframe by Bombardier. They've got two variants, the CS100 and CS300, both narrow-body, twin-engine, medium-range jets. The program launched back in 2007, so it's been around.
Yeah, it's been around for
a decade or so.
Yeah.
Wow. And they had plans for service 2013. That's what they were looking to do, and they actually had their maiden flight launch in September of 2013, so they met that.
Gotcha.
That was for the 100, though. The 300 didn't get its maiden flight until February 2015.
Now, what's the main difference between the 100 and the 300?
Seating capacity. So that's the biggest thing that I've seen is just how many people it can carry. But they're both very fuel efficient. They look to be great aircraft, and so much so that they've caught the eye of Delta.
Wow.
And they've put in an order for 75 100s.
Quite a few.
Quite a few, and that I think is what really stirred up this issue with Boeing. So
Gotcha. And the 100, what's the seating on that? How many seats are we looking at?
The 100 at the low end can seat 100 passengers. At the high end, fully configured, it can seat 133.
Okay. So that's like a regional jet almost. A little bit bigger than a regional jet.
A little bit bigger. You could compare it to an E195.
Okay. Which is, who makes that one?
Embraer.
Gotcha. But I know the 100, Boeing was saying that they were subsidized for it. So do you have any background on that, or what happened with that?
Yeah, according to Global News, federal loan from Canada of $372.5 million was given to Bombardier for the C Series and their global 7,000 programs.
That's quite a bit of money.
That's a lot of money, and then they also got another $1 billion from Quebec.
And Quebec, that's the local government that gave them a loan. So
yes,
wow, that's quite a bit of money. Now, did Quebec get any percentage of ownership or anything, or
they
what happened
did?
With that?
They did actually. So the way that's turning out is actually pretty interesting. Airbus has the majority stake in the C Series aircraft. So for Airbus, they own 50.01% of the C Series. Bombardier has 31%. And Investment Quebec, I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce it the way that they say their name, has 19%. So that's that $1 billion that was invested came from that Investment Quebec, and they own 19% of the C Series.
Wow. So they're actually going to be making money from this probably once they start delivering more airplanes.
Exactly.
That almost reminds me of the controversy with Emirates, Qatar, where their governments were putting money into them.
Tons of money.
Yes. This is very similar to that, so I can see why Boeing is kind of getting a little antsy with what's going on.
Especially with the way some of the major airlines, legacy airlines in the United States, have fought those Middle Eastern carriers. So Boeing's like, hey, if you're going to do that on that issue, why can't we? So
absolutely, on a foreign manufacturer.
Exactly.
Now, from looking at the C Series and all of the research, it looks like a really good airplane.
It's a good comparison to a couple of airframes. Like I said before, the 100 can compete directly with the E195, and the 300 can compete with the 737 MAX 7 and the Airbus 319 Neo. So.
Well, and that's interesting that Airbus would invest in something that's a competitor to their own airplane.
True. But since they have such a huge stake in it, they're going to make money off of...
Yeah, they're going to make money anyway.
Exactly.
The C Series could be a potential replacement for that airframe?
I think so. And they're looking to have a second final assembly area in Mobile, Alabama, at their final assembly there for the 319s, the 320s coming out of there.
Now, if they're... Because... Let's go back. That tariff is on airplanes that are built outside of the country.
Correct.
So would that tariff of, I think you said it was 300%,
Yep.
Would that apply if the airplane was built in the United States?
Boeing says that it will. So
Wow.
We have an actual quote from the EVP and General Counsel for Boeing, Michael Luddig. He said, and I quote, "The announced deal has no impact or effect on the pending proceedings at all. Any duties finally levied against the C Series, which are now expected to be that 300%, will have to be paid on any imported C Series airplane or part." That's the key word there.
Or part.
Any part that comes in for that aircraft is going to be taxed 300%, or will not be permitted into the country.
Wow.
So unless they start manufacturing parts in the U.S.
Which that would be great for us.
Absolutely. More jobs.
Exactly. But and I know there's a company in England or Ireland. I believe actually both countries are producing some parts for it, and they've actually come out and said, don't tax these. It'll affect our jobs over here. But what exactly was that tariff for?
So, broken down, the United States Department of Commerce observed subsidies of 220% and then 80% for the preliminary anti-dumping duty.
Wow.
So, that's how that's broken down.
So because Canada's government put in that $1 billion, they're claiming that was a subsidy, and they're going to levy a 220%.
Yes.
Wow. And then 80%, I'm assuming anti-dumping, they're selling for less than what it cost, or?
Right.
Gotcha. Wow. So that's an interesting development, especially now Airbus is involved.
Yeah, especially, and it's going back to the drama of it. There's another tweet along with Michael Ludwig's comments, but a statement by Boeing on Airbus and Bombardier was, and I quote, "This looks like a questionable deal between two heavily state-subsidized competitors to skirt the U.S. government findings. Everyone should play by the same rules for free and fair trade to work." So it looks like Boeing's going really hard after this. It'll be interesting to see how folks that will be.
And I think I can understand why.
Absolutely.
The 300, though, that's their larger airplane.
Correct.
So do you have any of the seats or the mileage on how far that can fly? And is it really a direct competitor to Boeing? Or is Boeing just saying this because they're upset that Delta didn't order with them, or that American could potentially not order the 737?
So based on my own research, this is nothing from Boeing. I went directly to United's website and Delta's website for these numbers, for their variants on the 737-800. But for United, their 738 has a capacity of 154. So when you go back and you think about the 300 being able to seat up to 160, seats are there. And then diving a little deeper into the Delta 738, they have 160 capacity. It's configured at 160 seats.
So it'd almost be the same regardless of what airframe.
Right. The range on that, and by the way, the range on the Delta 738 is 2,870 statute miles, and their cruising speed is 449 knots or 517 miles per hour.
Gotcha.
The C Series 300 has a range of 3,300 statute miles. Cruise speed almost identical, 447 knots at 515 miles per hour.
So it sounds like it's not the 100 that Boeing has a problem with. It sounds like 300 is the closest competitor to them.
But they're not saying that explicitly. They're saying it for anything that's imported, because when you look at it, parts are going to be able to work on both 100 and 300 since they're in a family.
That's a family aircraft now.
Exactly.
Kind of like Boeing 737, 200, 300,
exactly,
all the way up to their newest 800, etc.
Exactly. So that, while they're not saying that explicitly, I think that's the case, that they're focusing on the 300 specifically.
Gotcha. One of the things that I read recently was from, I believe it was Business Insider, was that they were talking about how when Boeing 717, they sold a number of those, but it didn't fit into the family airplanes. And when we're talking about parts and everything, they had to have specific parts just for that airplane, whereas their other aircraft fell into that family like we were just talking about. Mm-hmm. With Airbus having such a huge stake in this, and in some articles it goes to say that in a few years Airbus will own 100% of the C Series. It doesn't really fit into their family of airplanes. So that's almost interesting in that, Boeing did this with an airplane. It didn't work. Now Airbus is doing it.
Right.
Is Airbus going to now take that 100, 300 and start building a family just around that airframe?
I think business-wise, that would make the most sense. If you're going to sink the amount of money that they have into this partnership and you're expecting to get that type of return on investment, I think you have to.
And I mean, and looking at Delta with, they're bringing in, what did you say? It was 100 seats for the 100?
Yes.
So, and I know that they have a lot of 50-seat aircraft at the regionals. Potentially, just thinking in the back of my head, we're going through a pilot shortage. There's, less people coming into the profession to be pilots, dispatchers, maintenance.
Exactly.
But with this, with the stats on the 100, it almost looks like that could be a potential replacement for those 50-seat airplanes.
Absolutely. You can use less aircraft to do the same thing. So that means less pilots, less mechanics.
Less dispatchers, etc.
Exactly.
So that could really, maybe Delta didn't see this as a replacement for the 737, but more as a replacement to help them with the problem out there.
Because we're looking at the 100. That is the only thing Delta has agreed to with Bombardier. They have not agreed to the 300 yet. So,
which is interesting. Like we said earlier, that Boeing is really fighting hard. But perhaps they fear that once people get their hands on the 100, they're going to order the 300.
They're going to really like that aircraft and think that that's best for their routes and the things of that nature. Yeah, I agree.
Interesting. The pilot shortage is a big problem right now. There are estimates out there that say anywhere from 4,500 pilots per year to 5,000 pilots per year are needed.
That's a massive, massive number.
That would be every single regional pilot being taken into the mainline market.
You've been looking at this quite a bit, haven't you, Cory?
Yeah, just a little. It's one of those hot topics that we're all facing.
It's a huge topic.
All of our companies are, whether it's a regional airline, a major, even the cargo companies, they're all seeing the effects of this. And
even the military, right?
Absolutely. The military is facing a shortage of, I believe it was 1,550 pilots.
Was that for the Air Force or which branches of the military?
No, that's the Air Force.
The Air Force.
So that was specific to the Air Force. Unfortunately, I haven't seen any stats for all of the armed forces. But, even CBP, the Forest Service, if you just go on Indeed and type in pilot, you'll see how many job postings there are for this profession. And, we're not really sure, is it because of, quote-unquote millennials, or is it because of other problems, lifestyle, pay, etc.? We really don't know, but
finances to get your ratings.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there. You were in school to be a helicopter pilot,
correct.
And I'm sure that costs quite a bit of money.
Cost me a lot of money, and I'm going to be paying back on that for years to come. So I fully side with young people or folks that want to get into aviation, period, and they look at that hefty bill, or they don't realize quite the bill that they're going to get once they get started. They see that the loans and the money necessary to make these flights. I feel for them, and
absolutely,
it leads directly to this shortage, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just clear, why spend that much money to go into a profession, have all those loans on top of how much you're paying for your college degree.
Correct.
The majority of these airlines, they want a bachelor's degree and a minimum an associate's degree.
Right.
And you see, prices are skyrocketing everywhere. Everybody knows how much college costs nowadays.
And it's only going up, too.
Yeah. Quite a bit.
Every single year.
So, one of the reasons we're in this is there was a rule, and a lot of people will say this has nothing to do with it, but we want to show both sides to the argument. Mm-hmm. Pay is one side, but training is a big side of it. And there was something in 2009 that caused it. There was an accident.
Colgan.
Colgan, exactly. And, our hearts go out to those families and to everybody out there that was affected by that accident. And one of the things that came out of that was there was a requirement for 1,500 hours. Mm-hmm. Now, that 1,500 hours, it can be reduced if you have an ATP or if you have if you're in the military, etc., by a few hundred hours. But you're looking at 1,500 hours before somebody can step foot on a passenger aircraft and fly people. And that's a big hurdle,
That is a huge hurdle. And I can tell you from flying and dealing with CFIs, they are stuck being a CFI for several years before they even come close to that number. So if you're not going through that ATP program and you're going through another school or another avenue, that 1,500 hours is a beast, especially when you don't have as many students as you could have.
Absolutely.
So it takes even longer to get to that point. Plus, by that time, you're paying back student loans as a CFI, and you're not making a whole lot of money.
And it's the same with banner towing or crop dusting. I mean, unfortunately, it's just the money is not at that level. The money is really, once you get to the regionals, once you get to the majors, is where you're really going to make that majority. But when we're talking about 4,500 pilots, to go back to the C Series, if they're looking at that as a replacement, that could reduce those numbers.
Exactly.
So I definitely believe, that airlines that are picking up these airplanes are seeing that as a replacement for those older airplanes and ones that can carry less people.
I think so.
I just wanted to bring up one quote, which is from the military. And they stated this is a supply-demand mismatch. So the demand is there for pilots. I mean, traditionally, you went into the military, they paid for your training, you served 3 to 4 years, sometimes 5, 6, and then you left and you became a mainline pilot. But right now, there's such a reduction in force in the military with pilots that even those people leaving are not going to the mainline because there is no supply. General David Goldfein, he's the Air Force Chief of Staff.
Yep.
He stated the nation as a whole is producing less pilots than we need in order to service commercial and business aviation. I definitely would agree with him on a whole. We've seen the pricing out there, and it's a big barrier just for people to even want to go on a discovery flight.
Exactly.
I'm not sure how much a helicopter flight costs.
You want to know?
Sure.
So on average, to rent a Schweitzer 300 two-seater training helicopter is around $600.
Wow.
For an hour. Let me reemphasize, for 1 hour.
That's incredible.
And that's, you're renting the aircraft and you're also paying your fee for the CFI as well. But that's a staggering amount. And you're expected to fly 50 hours to get your private, or 50 hours for your instrument, or and then you have to do 100 for your commercial. However it breaks down.
That adds up to be quite a bit.
That is a lot of money if you're trying to go helicopter route. And that's another issue, is trying to get into the military to fly helicopters, not just fixed-wing aircraft.
No.
This
is really industry-wide.
It is industry-wide. It is not just to the airlines. It's Part 135, like you're saying, with business aviation, but it's also 135 when it comes to helicopter EMS, firefighting out in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Everywhere, they're hurting. They're hurting for pilots.
There are some things being done, though. I'm not sure if you've seen what JetBlue is doing. They're doing an interesting thing where they're taking people from 0 hours all the way up to 1,500.
So how are they doing that? Do you have to be a part of JetBlue working for them, or?
Well, it's interesting.
Okay.
So
Tell me
you
about
have you have to apply, and you have to pass their test.
What is their test?
It's an online assessment. I don't really know much of what's on the test, as I haven't taken it. I didn't want to pay the fee to take the test.
Oh, so there's a fee included.
There is a fee included to take that assessment. Okay. But JetBlue will take you from 0 hours to airline pilot, and
very cool.
You have a guaranteed job afterwards. Obviously you have to pass their testing for their, that's required by the FAA to fly the 320, the 1, or, the Embraers that they fly.
So is this a joint partnership with some type of flying school, or is this all in-house? Do you know anything?
No, they have partnerships with certain schools, I believe, because in order to build up that 1,500, you're going to have to do CFI, et cetera. You don't just get to, go from zero into an airplane, into a commercial airliner. And I highly doubt that they're taking one of their A321s offline to let you build 1,500 hours. I'd be shocked.
That'd be fun, wouldn't it?
It would be fun. It'd be a little bit more than, $600 an hour, more like $5,000 or $6,000.
One of the things that I heard about this pilot shortage is that Congress is looking at changing the requirements for 1,500 hours. You got
Really?
any info on this, Cory?
I had heard that, the companies were really advocating for it. But, I mean, do we really think that they're going to reduce 1,500 down?
I don't know. I would hope they would. But, there's some folks out there saying, well, we haven't had an accident since 2009. So is this really a necessary rule? Is it proving to do that? Or is it just training's better? Why haven't we?
Well, we could get into nitty and gritty, and maybe we should do our own episode just on that rule, because there's a lot of controversy about this 1,500 hour. And,
it is.
Like you pointed out, we haven't had an accident here with this. Maybe it is. Maybe it is proving to be the right thing to do. But
I'd like to see some data.
Absolutely.
On that. So I think we may do that in the future, pull some of that, and see what we can take a look at and do a deep dive on this in another episode. But.
Yeah, I just pulled up really fast a quote from an aviation expert from a school you might have heard of.
A little bit.
All right.
I think I might even know the guy that you're talking about.
Gotcha. His name is Higgins. His last name, Higgins.
Jim Higgins.
Jim Higgins. All right. Well, I wish they would put his first name in the article next time.
Show him some respect, y'all. Come on.
Absolutely. He stated when it came to accidents, only one fatal crash in the last 100 in the U.S. involved pilots with fewer than 1,500 hours of flying. And, he said this. It was a really good soundbite and feel-good measure. That is one heck of a statement to make.
And Jim, I trust his judgment. He's done several studies on this. He was talking to airlines before the shortage even happened, and they kind of laughed at him when he said there's going to be a shortage in the next few years. And he was on the front lines of that. And great guy. I think he's right. If you go and look at these accidents, look at the pilots, how many hours they have, I think that might be an interesting take.
Absolutely, and maybe one day we can actually have him on as a guest.
Absolutely,
and do a deep dive into what is happening.
I think he would love to get his voice out there and to talk about this, because he's a good guy. He knows a lot. I trust his judgment, and we'll see if we can't get him out here and to talk to you guys.
Yeah, so checking out classbravo.org, that's our website, and maybe you'll see him on there. Maybe we'll get in touch with him and see if he'd be willing to come on and share some thoughts. All of the websites we referenced, all of the articles, I know we've really worked hard, really you, Ray, have worked hard on keeping a list of those. So in our show notes, we're going to have a list of where you guys can go to read this background information.
Please read it.
Absolutely. So we'll include those links. I'm not sure if you have anything to add. Otherwise, I think call it a wrap.
Yeah, I just, like Cory said, please check out the links, read these articles, make a decision for yourself, make your own opinion. Don't take our word for it. Read it. And we would love to hear your feedback. We've got a couple of avenues for that. So check out our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We've got a YouTube channel that we're hoping to start up soon. So be on the lookout for that content and talk with us. Reach out to us. We'd love to hear your voice.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ray. It's good chatting with you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
All opinions expressed in this podcast and on classbravo.org are not representative of our current employers or any past employers.